Sure. All right. So good morning, everyone. I know you can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Whoa. I am so excited to have you here with us. I am also excited there are two folks actually online with us today. Of course, now I've made everybody go away, so now you can't see them, but so Emily Brink, who is one of our cohort 3. Sorry, I'm making the screen big, is with us. Emily, can you give us a wave there? So Emily got the crowdids, but she's feeling okay. So we'll get you here in person at some point. Don't worry, we're very excited that you're able to join us remotely. And now Hagiwara, one of our mentors, joining us from Richmond, Virginia. Hello now. Thank you for being here. You're going to see many more mentors joining us remotely throughout the day, particularly in our small groups. And so we are excited to, this is our new hybrid world. So we are excited to have you here. I'm going to shrink that down. Before I begin, I need to ask Monica to make some announcements. So I'm going to have her do that for us.
Good morning. I hope you all had a good night. Welcome. Today, some of you will be at home lab in the morning, some in the afternoon. I'm going to walk over the morning group after the session. And right at the end of the session, we can announce, if anybody needs it, who's going where. And I'm going to be passing around a consent form for home lab because they'll be videoing you and taking pictures. They're not going to use it in any kind of funny way, but we will watch it as a group afterwards, and we just need you to sign to say you consent to that. Tonight, scholars will see you at Pizza House, hopefully, and mentors, you're going to have a beautiful dinner at Aventura. Both of them will be beautiful, of course. Pizza House and Aventura, equally but differently. And I think that's all I've got, unless... Oh, yes. Absolutely. There's going to be lunch after the first session at 12:30. We have coffee, tea, water all day long in case you need it. And then we'll have snacks starting at 2 o'clock. And that'll be every day you're here. Okay.
So this is a cool building that we're in. This is the Michigan League, which is a old building on campus, and in the days everything seems to just get bigger and better. So I'm glad that we get to show off a little bit of our campus. I encourage you to walk around during lunch today. There's a lot. All these buildings are open, really. All the museums are free. So feel free to just kind of either grab your lunch and wander around, or just make some time for that. So all right, so I'm going to kick us off to kind of set the stage for the next 2.5 days, maybe, if I can make this go. Here we go. So, we are interested in understanding how mental and physical health relate, and we're particularly interested in positioning that relationship within either minority populations or within a context of understanding how the intersection of mental and physical health relates to health inequities more broadly. So it just took me like 45 words to say that, right? So clearly, this is a complex thing. But if one of the things that we know that it's important for us to sort of have simple explanations, sort of as few assumptions as possible. These are, an Occam's razor is one example of this idea. But then what I think about sort of what makes our job a little bit different, or a way for us to approach this job is something that Oliver Sacks had said, which is, when we understand disease, or when we study disease, we can understand physiology, but when we examine the person with disease, we can gain wisdom about life. And that we are trying to sort of have our cake and eat it too here, where we both want a rigorous understanding of physiology and biology, because no matter what our exposure is that we're interested in, somehow it turns into, whatever there's some process by which that influences risk of cancer or heart disease or depression or schizophrenia, right? It's like at some point there's some interface, but that interface in and of itself does not tell us what it's like to live with cancer or live with schizophrenia or live with heart disease, right? So that's fundamentally what we're interested in when we talk about improving human health. So some objectives for this session. I know we said hello last night, but I'm going to ask everybody to say hello again real quick. And then I'll tell you a little bit about some of the challenges that we face, but also kind of close with some opportunities. So before I do, so I'm going to start real quick and we're going to go just table by table. And so what I'd love for you to do is just shout out real loud, because the people on the camera are not going to be able to hear us. So this will just be 5 minutes of a student, but I just, who you are, where you're at, and then what your role is in MIWI we could do the mic. That's true. Okay. Well, why don't we start here with Sherry, and then we're just going to do real quick. And I hope, again, this is not the last time you're going to say hello, but just, know that we are a very chatty, bondy group. So hopefully these are all your cousins. I don't know if you knew that, but all right. Sherry, go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Zhang. I'm starting my 3rd year as an assistant professor of population health at Arizona State University, and I'm here as a peer mentor. I'm part of the inaugural cohort 1.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charity Watkins. I'm an assistant professor at North Carolina Central University, HBCU in Durham, North Carolina, in social work. And I am here, thankfully, as a peer mentor from cohort 1.
Good morning, everyone. I am Erica Spears. I am also a part of cohort 1. I am currently at Louisiana Public Health Institute as a director of monitoring, evaluation, and learning.
Good morning. My name is Kalia Lewis, assistant professor in the Department of Public Health, Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Missouri, and also a peer mentor from cohort 1.
Hello, good morning. My name is Tiffany Ford. I am a postdoc at the Brookings Institution, and I'm here in cohort 3. So I'm excited to meet everybody.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Brown, and I'm a 2nd-year postdoc at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm a part of cohort 3.
Good morning. My name is Dara Sorkin. I'm a professor at the University of California, Irvine, and I'm here as a mentor.
Morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Tolentino. I'm finishing my postdoc here at Michigan, and I'm cohort 3.
Morning, I'm Crystal Kittle, and I am part of cohort 3. I am a postdoc at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Hi, I'm Tara Bautista. I'm a 2nd-year postdoc in Yale School of Medicine and here in cohort 3.
Hi, I'm Aurora Lay. I'm also part of cohort 3. I'm going into my 3rd year as an assistant professor here in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences, UMich.
Hello, I'm Maria Blöchel. I'm here from Leipzig in Germany, and I work at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences there as a postdoc, sorry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria Golden. I am part of cohort 3. I am completing my 3rd year of my postdoctoral research fellowship at Cleveland State University and the Center for Urban Education. I am transitioning to the University of Memphis in the fall as assistant professor in the Department of Psychology.
Good morning. I'm Phyllis Sharps. I'm a professor emerita of nursing from Johns Hopkins University, and I'm here as a mentor.
Good morning. I'm Gerald McKinley. I'm an assistant professor at Western University, which is just over the border in Canada. I'm part of cohort 1, and here's a peer mentor.
Everybody, we didn't get the clue that we were supposed to sit over there. My name is Juan.
I think we talked about that.
We are part of cohort. I am part of cohort 1 as well, and I'm here as a peer mentor. And I'm currently finishing off my 3rd year as a postdoc at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'll be transitioning in the fall to an assistant professor position at the University of Minnesota in their Department of Psych. So thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eskar Kasai. I'm a PhD student here at U of M, the School of Public Health. Bree is my advisor, so she invited me to kind of observe.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Obalaji Ibitoye. I'm a yes, I did, finally. I'm a postdoc at The Ohio State University at the Institute for Population Research, and I'm a member of Cohort 3.
Hi, everybody. My name's Heather Farmer. I'm a scholar in Cohort 3 as well, and I am an assistant professor of human development family sciences at the University of Delaware.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tasneem Kambati. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I am in Cohort 3.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Rodas. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky in the College of Medicine and in the Department of Behavioral Science. I'm also an occupational therapist, so I have lots of experience out in the field in rural Kentucky, and I'm excited to bring that to the research world.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Effie. I'm also part of Cohort 3 scholar, and currently I'm a postdoc at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. I'll be transitioning into a research associate position whenever I heard my funding decision. Otherwise, it will be in October. Yeah.
So first of all, the fact that Cohort 1 is so clearly bonded here, I feel is very good. So for Cohort 3, I just, again, I wasn't kidding when I said your cousins are in the room here. So you got this extended family, and you know, and part of our approach to that is because we know that nobody does it alone. That is, nobody succeeds alone. Also, nobody fails alone, and we're all about success. And so this is a community of people dedicated to that. So let me tell you again, just briefly, because I want us. Sorry, you, especially for our scholars today, you have a busy day. So you are doing a small work group either in the morning or the afternoon. And then on the flip side of that, you are in home lab for your data collection simulation training experience, which is going to be amazing. So I know that you're going to have a great time, but you know, so today's the hardest day, I guess, in terms of, so keep your energy up. Tomorrow, the mentors are going to take center stage here, and they're going to be the ones sort of like talking you through different things, a lot of great conversation. In general, this is a very chatty group. You should always feel free to raise your hand. There's a notepad on your table there if there's something that you just sort of like want to write down that you feel like is important to express. And so, yeah, so let me, oh, sorry. So the last thing I'll tell you is, so in your welcome bag, you got a notepad that had I don't know if you saw the book plate in it that says the job pad, right? So the just one bad paragraph a day. And that is writing advice that was given to me by Barry Leibowitz, who was a very important scholar and mentor in geriatric mental health. And he's like, that should be your goal, just one bad paragraph a day. So writing, whether it's manuscripts or grants, is a hard thing to do. But break it down and use that job pad. And I know you're going to write down some great ideas over the next 3 days there. So again, just by way of introduction, it's no surprise to anybody in this room that there are, mental health is a critically important and underappreciated part of mental health, or part of broader health in particular, because the connections between mental health and physical health are nuanced, and they frankly change over the lifespan, and are very contextualized. But the challenge, and sort of why I created MIWI, is reflected in part by this quote here by Richard Holt, but you can see Norman Sartorius, who you're going to hear from tomorrow as part of our interdisciplinary panel, is also one of the authors on here, that we actually, if you're going to actually change the field, you need to actually train people. Like, you can't just sort of change, do different studies. We have to actually change how we train people. And so our job here is to try to make that happen. Now, a couple of challenges that we have in doing this is, the first is that, whether we sort of are explicit about it or not, for those of us who are studying kind of health as a primary determinant, most generally that has been positioned either, again, implicitly or explicitly within a biomedical model of health, which can make it difficult for us to meaningfully engage with fields like social work or policy, or other kind of population sciences. And that's a problem, because when we think about the biomedical model of health, like why do we even have a model? The purpose of the model is to explain, to have some vision in our mind about how the world works. And our world is interested in trying to understand why some individuals or some groups are more likely to get sick than others. And that's useful. But the problem is that those same conceptual models of explaining why these things happen, they set boundaries as to what is and is not a legitimate question worthy of scientific inquiry. They inform everything that we do. They inform who gets into the study. They inform how we measure the exposure, how we measure the outcome, what the exposure is, et cetera. And then they guide our interpretation of findings, including the interpretation of findings that are relatively unexpected given some model, right? Like they define what is an unexpected result. So instead, we are in MIWI are explicit about our model of a biopsychosocial model. This is not a new model, and many of us may sort of like do this, like may center this in our work. But this model was sort of maybe not first put forth, but certainly like most, I would say completely put forth by Engel in this 1977 paper in Science, where he's critiquing the field of psychiatry, which at this point is trying to sort of go make a hard pivot to the biomedical model. And his argument is that this is never going to work because the boundaries between health and disease, sick and well, are never clear because they are diffused by cultural, social, and psychological considerations. And so he's not saying this is not a problem to be solved, but this is a context to be considered when trying to understand this. So that's the first challenge, is that we're sort of like the dominant model in health is this biomedical model, and we need to really rather center, we feel, this biopsychosocial model. The second big challenge is that data. So we often don't have relevant or comprehensive data in samples that are representative of the populations we care about. This is not news to probably anyone in this room. So, I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of the Framingham Heart Study. This is this, very important longitudinal cohort study from Framingham, Massachusetts, that, and this is from an editorial, said it like fundamentally changed the way we study and approach chronic disease and public health spheres, right? This thing changed everything. So the Framingham Heart Study is almost, if not entirely, white. So everyone in Framingham, everyone who was in this cohort, you can see this is their backgrounds. And so some are from Western Europe or Eastern Europe. There are a few Canadians in the in the representation there, but that's who's in Framingham. All right, that is who is in this study that changed the game for how we study chronic disease. But that's not who dies of heart disease in the United States, right? Like that's not who's at highest risk of studying heart disease. And so if we want to understand how to make these graphs not look the way they look, Framingham does not have the answer, all right? It has answers to other questions, but it doesn't have the answer to this question. So instead, and these are different data sources that you'll be able to learn about during here, we have other data that have had to be created because so reflecting the fact that Framingham has a lot of answers, but not the answer to that question. And the third is that we need greater application of, we got a lot of fancy tools. We had a good discussion this morning about, R and, like what are the benefits and drawbacks of it. But the point is that, linear regression is not going to cut it when we are talking about the types of relationships that we're interested in, right? This kind of, we need things that can deal with contextual data, things that can deal with kind of interesting samples or sort of nonlinear relationships, right? And I say this because you get these kind of like this may be a model that you have in your head. This is kind of the stress process model from sociology. And, again, I understand why it's simplified, right? Nobody actually thinks it's this simple, even though this itself is not actually a very simple diagram. But the thing that I really want to emphasize and why I think MIWI is so important is that you can see here that they're just like physical health, mental health, general health, but those are not interchangeable outcomes, okay? Like they're not, whether from the perspective of biology, whether from the perspective of behaviors, and certainly not from the perspective of interventions, right? Like when is the average age of onset for depression, right? It's like 20, okay? So if you're trying to prevent depression, That's a very different population you need to be intervening on than if you're trying to prevent heart disease. Okay, so but from a sociological perspective, I understand why this looks the way it looks, right? Because they're interested in these structures, but then it's like, and then like the mic just kind of drops down when they get to the back, when they get to the back part here in terms of like, and then how did that happen? You know, so we can do better. Sorry, and then finally, we have this translation gap that requires us to engage with a diverse group of stakeholders beyond the academy. This is again, this is part of why you know, the people in this room have such different experiences, have such different jobs, have, you know, either currently or in the past, but also are sort of, what I'm trying to say is like, where you're not, you probably feel like other people in your department or other people at your unit do things differently than you do, or you do things differently, whatever, you know, that is, you are in the right place. Everyone here feels that way. that is why you're here. So, and then the way we think about this translation gap is the idea from whose bench to whose bedside. So again, most of our interventions, this is particularly true in mental health, but most of our interventions have been developed on kind of younger adults with limited physical comorbidities, but that's not who those interventions are often applied to, right? They're often applied to people who have complex physical health problems. They may have, you know, difficulty getting access to care, et cetera. We also have a mismatch between expertise in mental health in terms of interventions and the care settings where that care is provided, which is overwhelmingly in primary care or kind of social services settings. So those are sort of we have 4 big challenges, okay, and then some opportunities. So the first is conceptual framework. So really, how do we, as a framework, and if this biopsychosocial model is our kind of like, you know, big F framework, capital F, this helps us think about what is a reasonable scientific question. How would I go about measuring the exposure, the outcome? What do I need to worry about in terms of selection processes, or, you know, et cetera, in terms of that, and then also guiding the interpretation of those results. That conceptual framework directly informs every element of the study design. I already said this before, and I want to emphasize this last point because the study design really sets the limits on what information you know versus what information you don't know about your study population. Okay, so that we sort of think about all the things I'm measuring, but you have to understand that like everything you didn't measure is something you don't know about that population. You may have be able to make inferences about it, but you don't know about it. Okay, so that's important to understand. And then finally, this idea of analytic techniques, right? Data is not information. There's a difference between those two. It's the way you get information is through interpreting that data within a conceptual framework using appropriate techniques. I'm going to argue, and you're going to learn a lot in this program about triangulation as sort of an overarching approach to that. That is using different approaches that have relatively uncorrelated sources of bias associated with them. So that might be qualitative and quantitative data, for example, right, as one way of triangulation. It might also be using statistical techniques and then like a data science approach, which also have kind of relatively very different approaches to understanding data. But the point is that helps us if your interpretation, that is, if your information is not, it's not satisfying to say what you learned is dependent on the assumptions of linear regression being true, right? Like that is not a satisfying conclusion to make. You know, if your interpretation is robust to whether it's a regression framework or a data science framework, whether it's quantitative data or qualitative data, whether it's a clinical sample or a population sample, then you have learned something, right? Like that, but that approach of triangulation, you can use that as your broader study design. Aim 1, this thing, aim 2, this, blah, 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 right? But like the point is that we know that neither one of those approaches in and of itself has the answer. I don't know if I have, Monica, when am I supposed to be done here? All right, perfect. I got a few. All right, so I'm going to tell you one example. Thank you for that. I should have known that. So I'm going to tell you one example because one of the things you're going to learn a lot in MIWI, and one of the things we use in our training approach is case examples. And so I'm going to tell you about one case example from a study I led while I was in Richmond. And so Crystal here was I don't, and you're not in this picture, but you were certainly came to many of our meetings with here. But this is my team here when we finished our data collection for the stress and sugar study. So I'm going to illustrate these, again, these opportunities with one specific example. So our conceptual framework. So our conceptual framework for the study is the environmental affordances model of health disparities. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this today, but what I want to emphasize is the sort of two big ideas. The first is that mental and physical health are not interchangeable outcomes. That's the first big idea. And the second is that stress has a complex and biologically embedded relationship with behavior. That is, stress is not just how you feel about things, but there is a biological consequence to that, and that behaviors, and I'm not going to review this data, but there's lots of really fascinating experimental data from animals and humans showing that when you stress, there's a biological relationship between being stressed and behaviors that people and animals engage in. So we are interested in the stress and sugar study, as the name implies, has to do with type 2 diabetes. So we are interested in trying to reduce disparities in type 2 diabetes. We know that depression has a bidirectional relationship with diabetes. Maybe stress is also part of the story, although the data is really mixed. And so our goal here was to examine the role of stress exposure and stress reactivity on the incidence of type 2 diabetes using a design that could actually answer the question, to what degree do those factors relate to health disparities, and socioeconomic and racial disparities specifically is what we were focused on. So what we did is, so this is a map of Richmond, Virginia. And so what we did is we had a 12-month longitudinal study. Our final sample was 125 people. Our target sample was 200, but I got cancer in between getting this grant and actually being done. So we didn't quite get it done, but that's all right. We collected a lot of amazing data. And we had a 2x2 sampling frame. So what we did, Richmond, like actually a lot of the South, is much more racially integrated than other parts of the country. That is, African Americans and whites are more likely to live in a racially integrated neighborhood than they are, for example, here in Michigan. And so what we actually had is African Americans and white adults who are living in the same general type of area. And then we sampled from the highest tertile of socioeconomic. So we back it up. We took everyone who had a diagnosis or met criteria for prediabetes that had been seen at VCU over a 12-month period. We geocoded all those people in the city of Richmond. We then mapped that onto area level socioeconomic status of those areas. And then we purposely sampled from the highest tertiles, African Americans and whites, and the lowest tertiles, African Americans and whites in Richmond. So we had this 2x2 sampling frame, okay, that could disentangle race from place. So I told you we were interested in stress, but stress is not just in your head. So we measured stress reactivity using something called the Trier Social Stress Test, which is a laboratory paradigm developed by psychologists, where you give a speech in front of a panel, and the panel is not non-responsive to you, and he kind of stresses you out. We collected cortisol just using a little cotton swab salivette over this period of time. This is what that graph ends up looking like. So the x-axis here is time. The y-axis is cortisol. The white high, white low, black high, black low refers to area level socioeconomic status. And so you could see that people, we were able to stress people out, and then they returned to their baseline level. Now, the other thing that we did in this study, which was trying to address this problem, is there's really no, like, how would you measure stress? Probably every one of us in this room might have a different approach to measuring stress. There is no gold standard there. So one of the things that we did is we knowing that, we intentionally included more than one measure. So we could compare, like, how were these different measures related to each other, and how were they related to this measure of stress reactivity? So, I'm not gonna go over these findings in detail, but what is important here is that, one, they were only moderately correlated, so about 0.6, which is fine, right? But it's not that high. And for both measures, though, and this is again this idea of triangulation, the higher you scored on those stress measures, the more blunted or less steep slope of reactivity to the Trier you had, right? So which is consistent with the idea of kind of theoretical models of allostatic load, this kind of wear and tear on the body, that the more stress you're under, the less sort of responsive your body becomes to it over time. So we find evidence of that. So the high is the orange line here. So the folks on the orange are reporting the most stress on our self-report stress measures. And what I'm showing you is their reactivity to the TRIR. So then we want to know, well, how does this relate to social disadvantage? And so now we've got this, because we have adequate sample size in all of these different groups, we can actually array this by neighborhood socioeconomic status. And so what we saw is that regardless of what you told us about your stress, so those in the dotted line are people living in the lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. Okay, so solid lines are the wealthy neighborhoods, dotted lines are the poorer neighborhoods. And so what you can see is if you lived in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, it actually didn't tell you, it didn't matter what your stress level was. It was blunted no matter what. And stress was only related to stress reactivity when you were in a higher socioeconomic neighborhood. Okay, so again, our interpretation, and this is where you sort of like say, like, this is where I get to start interpreting within my model in my head, is that these existing measures of stress are actually not indexing. They're actually not capturing the variation in stress in lower income areas. Like they're not differentiating these groups as far as the neurobiology is concerned. When we looked at race and ethnicity, we saw greater stress was associated with a blunted response, and there were not strong differences here by race. There was one difference in terms of recovery, but generally the shape of these curves is very similar. Okay. And again, so what that meant, or again, our interpretation is that these differences in stress reactivity are driven by place, not race. But without this kind of analytic approach and without this kind of sampling approach, we could not answer this question with the robustness that we've been able to answer it. I'm going to skip over this but just to kind of emphasize, obviously all those graphs were of lines that are varying over time. Okay, so these are data that are nested within individuals, which are then nested within place, which are then nested within this longitudinal data set. So we have to use some kind of, just not too hard, but it requires us to actually like use some different types of modeling approaches to better metric what the body's actually doing. And then the last thing I want to do is kind of close with, sort of pivot a little bit and bring James Jackson, who as I said last night, is one of our founding co-directors of this program and is a mentor of mine and somebody I've missed deeply. As I said, we're not just interested in mental and physical health. We're interested in mental and physical health as it specifically relates to minority health and health disparities. And so what I want to, another question that I think many of us have struggled with and don't quite know how to necessarily talk to other people about is like, what does it even mean to like control? Like, what does that even mean? And so James, in this talk that he gave he was getting an award at the American Psychological Sciences Convention, and this is a 60-minute talk that he's given that I'll share with people. I highly recommend just watching it. He's very explicit about that race is not a variable. Like that is not a useful framework for understanding what is this construct. And so, and the reason this matters is because when we look at the beta coefficient on the race variable, for example, in our models, we're actually asking this question if we're within a causal model. Like, what would have happened to people who were Black if they had been white, given that they were Black? Like, that is the question that we are actually asking within a causal model. But that question doesn't make, at least to me, that question does not make sense. I guess I'm willing to have a conversation about that, but like that question does not make sense. But that is the implied question we're trying to naively test between group comparisons within a causal model. And so I just want to sort of be explicit about that additional element of challenge that we have as scientists when trying to engage with other fields that don't understand this, right? Or they're not thinking about this. A better way to think about this is by Tyler Vanderweel and Whitney Robinson, this wonderful paper they wrote on the causal interpretation of race, where they introduce another variable that they call H, which is their representation of history. History as policies, history as colonialism, subjugation, et cetera, right? So the idea that those are the things that over generations have created these correlations that we observe at our time, which then we are trying to relate to some outcome. Why? So kind of coming back to close it out. So we know, comparisons are fundamental to what we do, right? They are the logical foundation of everything that we do, whether that's a control well in a DNA plot, whether that's a placebo in a drug trial, whether that's a reference group in a regression model. But we have to understand that a within group and a between group comparison are answering different scientific questions. And that's particularly important when people are either trying to interpret the beta coefficient on a variable like race, which again is not a variable, we should not think about it as a variable, or are trying to explain to people why I am proposing a study just among African Americans, or just among Latinos, or just among Native Americans, et cetera, right? So, but these are, you can make positive outcomes or positive arguments. There are so many positive arguments for doing within group comparisons. So don't apologize for your approach, justify your approach, right? Because that is the right scientific approach for like, there are situations where that is the most justified scientific approach for what you're trying to do. So again, what do we hope you're gaining? We're going to learn from everyone here about different disciplines and conceptual approaches. You're going to widen your personal library of how you collect, how you think about study design, how you collect data, data sources that already exist, and then you really broaden your network of people here. And again, we hope that this is the beginning of ongoing professional and scientific relationship between all level mentors, scholars, collaborators, peers, near peers, et cetera. And we are just very excited because, as you know, this is not your standard summer institute. This is the beginning of 9 months of mentorship and collaboration. And we are so grateful that you all are here with us today. And so that is what I have for you today. And pause for applause, right? But we are, and these slides are all on Canvas. So that's the other thing I want to say is that everything is there, and this recording will be on Canvas. And there's many of this stuff, including this right here, is a hyperlink to annotated bibliography about why you should do within group analyses. So you're welcome. So it's there for your next grant. So Monica, I love it. All right. So if there's time for
yeah,
I was going to say, if there are times, if there's any kind of clarifying question, obviously I'm going to be here all week. Yes. But if not, that's okay too. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Talking as a group. But in your graph, so it seems like individuals who are experiencing higher just basal levels of stress, just consistent throughout their everyday life, are experiencing higher stress. Is that they didn't have as high of a stress response during the stress test? Was that the takeaway?
So the more so if they, for example, if they scored higher on the perceived stress scale, their cortisol, they didn't mount a strong cortisol response to it. So sort of their slope was much more shallow than those who were reporting less stress in their day-to-day life. So that's the data. Our interpretation is that that's consistent with this idea of sort of a set point drift, which is the idea of allostatic load. Like the more stress you're under, sort of the more you think of it sort of takes more to actually rev up the engine now, because the engine is not sensitive anymore to kind of low levels of perturbations. The other way you can think about it is an idea, we're kind of struggling with this a little bit, the idea of like habituation in a way, right? So like if you live near a train, you probably hear it the first 10 times and then you stop hearing it, but that train's still going by, right? But your brain just tunes it out. We're not sure if that's relevant to the phenomenon that we're looking at here, but it's another sort of model that we can kind of think about in terms of like the neurobiology as to why that graph might look the way it looks.
So there's a similar pattern in individuals with alcohol use disorder, and that they have a higher basal level of stress. So when they're, even if they're not currently intoxicated, in experiencing stress, it takes a lot more stress to invoke a stress response. So there, I think it's a similar.
James would have loved to hear that.
Okay.
It's very consistent with his conceptual model. There was Tasneem had a question too, real quick.
Thank you for such a, kind of overarching idea for MIWI and for starting MIWI. I had more of a comment. I wondered, with the stress and sugar study and everything you've been doing, I wondered if you could speak, maybe not now, but throughout, in terms of your approach to team science and collaboration, and how these things get done in the way that we want to have them get done in this kind of approach. So I don't know if there's much. Oh.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that comment. And I will say tomorrow we're going to have several sessions specifically on this, sort of idea of team science and like, what does that actually mean? I will also say, this is an idea that I had for, 4 years before we actually got the funding for it, and so part of it is that things, you kind of come up to bat and get the reviewer feedback and think about it more and think, then go talk to an expert to see like, okay, they don't like this part of it. Is there a way, can you help me think about this a little bit differently? My comment would be, it's taken me a lot longer than I thought it would. And I guess I thought it would take less time because I work all the time, and so I just sort of, but I think that's the challenge of interdisciplinary work, is that it really does take longer. And I guess, I don't know if any of you bake, but like, you can't rush baking, so it's kind of like that, I feel like. So I'm going to close this out here, but we're going to have lots of time for conversation. So if you are, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Monica, I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to turn it over to Monica, who is going to explain what is happening next. Go ahead, Monica.